Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have George Hutton. He's the author of over 100 books, entrepreneur, personal coach, influence and persuasion expert, and master of human nature. Welcome to the show, George.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Same
Master
here.
of human behavior, master of
Yeah,
human nature.
right. And that is why we'll be talking about secrets of human behavior we'll
Yes.
learn from you. So, my first question to you, uh, George, is from that when you wrote about, about a customer base, you have written a very loyal customer base.
Mhm.
And so my question starts from there. How do you define a very loyal customer base or loyalty in today's time? Seeing the human nature as it is, because most of the human nature is about nowadays is about interest. As long as
Yes.
your interests meet, you are fine. You are loyal to a company as long as you are getting the best discounts. The day the
Yes.
discount is better
Yes.
on another company, you move on. So help us understand about this loyalty and through this the human nature and how to keep people on your side in whatever you do.
Well, one thing that Dale Carnegie said decades ago is that everybody is always listening to their favorite radio station, and that is WIIFM, which stands for What's in It for Me. And I've sold a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of sales jobs. And the easiest way to sell something to somebody, the easiest way to persuade people is to put it in terms of their own interests. And so when I write books and I develop programs, I make sure that I turn off my own ego. I turn off what I think they should be interested in. And I try to do my best to find out what they are interested in so they get real value from the products. And the more I do that, the more they are all eager to buy whatever new product I release because I keep delivering value. And this is something that is very hard to understand, even for people that are experts in economics. When you develop a product and you try to ascribe some kind of value to the product, whether it's a product or service or whether it's yourself, and that is that the value of that product is always in the eye of the user of that product. The customer is always right. And so, in order to create loyalty in your customers, you have to truly understand your customers. You have to truly understand what they want and continue to provide to them the things that they want in terms of their own subjective needs and desires. And I think it's my research in the human condition, human nature, that helps me get an edge on my competition because instead of a collection of ideas about human nature based on what I think human nature should be, I turn off my ego. I understand the human condition from an engineering, mechanical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint. And that helps me to truly understand what it is they want. And the more I create products that serve that selfish, internal, subjective definition of value, the more they are loyal to me.
Absolutely, George. So I want to understand, you know, for the audience is that how did you develop this whole interest in human nature? You started with a degree in physics, and
Yes.
physics is a bit more on the different side. Applied
Yes.
physics, understandable, but here it's a much more deeper about human behavior. So tell us about your understanding of this and how did you learn about it? Was it from the very beginning, or did you come across it and then you started noticing things about human nature?
Well, like you said, I first got a degree in physics many, many years ago. Ever since I was a child, I was fascinated by science. When I was in junior high school, I read all kinds of books about science that had all the math taken out. I read books on quantum mechanics and relativity and particle physics. And so I naturally majored in physics in college. And after college, I worked in a huge laboratory. I ran the laboratory after a few years and I worked there for 10 years, but I kind of got burned out because it's very, very labor intensive setting up and tearing down experiments and spending all the time summarizing the data. So I wanted to change. And so I went to Asia to teach English. And in teaching English, I had to familiarize myself with the grammatical structure of English. And the more I started to study the structure of grammar, the more I read books about grammar, the more I realized that the grammar, the structure of grammar, the structure of language is really the opposite side of the structure of thought. And this is something that I read in a Steven Pinker book called, I believe, The Stuff of Thought. And our expression of language, the expression of our linguistics, is really an outward expression of the structure of our internal thought. And I started to read all kinds of books about psychology. Probably one of the most influential books I've read was by Dr. Robert Cialdini, who wrote Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. And he wrote from a standpoint that it's easy to persuade people when you target people's unconscious persuasion triggers. And that just got me fascinated. So I started freelancing myself out as a copywriter. And the more I understood human nature, the more I understood the structure of language, the more money I could make as a copywriter, the more I could get people to buy stuff. And so I switched from copywriting to studying things like NLP and neuro linguistic programming. And that led me to study Dr. Milton Erickson, who was a physician and a therapist. And he essentially invented a form of conversational or covert hypnosis. And all the while I was doing this, I read books and books on economics. Not just economics, the theory of economics from a government standpoint, but the economics of subjective human decision making. And that all kind of meshed together. And I kind of had a few aha moments where I put this discipline and this discipline together, and it started to click for me. And so by understanding human nature, understanding the economics of human decision making, that just makes it a lot easier to talk to people in a way that you can help them solve their problems. And that's essentially what Milton Erickson did. He would tell these long, hour-long stories that were just completely hard to follow, completely confusing. But at the end of the hour-long storytelling session, the patient would leave. They would be a little bit confused. Then they would go home and realize after about a week that all their problems had been solved. And that was because he had a keen understanding of the internal structure of their problems. And he could solve their problems by using language and pacing their problems with certain elements within the story. And so that just made me absolutely fascinated. And I was probably much more fascinated in the structure of language, the structure of thought, the structure of human nature than I was in science when I was a kid. And I'm still absolutely fascinated in that. And the more stuff I study, the more I read, the more I'm starting to get a kind of a picture of what it is about human nature, what makes us tick. One of my favorite quotes is from Carl Jung, who said, "Unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will drive your life and you will call it fate." I think a much more updated version of that is, unless you understand all of our human instincts, they will drive your life and you will call it fate. And we are primarily made up of our instincts, which were programmed in by evolution, and we are our nature is kind of programmed by our childhood upbringing, which kind of rests on top of our instincts. And if you can understand these two things, you can really understand why people do things. And the more you understand why people do things, the more you understand what people really want, the more you can talk to them in a way that will really, really resonate with them instead of what you think they should be listening to.
Absolutely, George. Absolutely. There are hundreds and hundreds of books, many hundreds of books in the public domain, including your 100 books down there. Then why is it that, that there is less understanding nowadays? People don't read books, or is it they don't understand human nature? What is it that they understood earlier on when there was less means of communication? Nowadays, there are so many means of communication, and
Right.
that understanding is gone. So what is lacking from the personal relationship point of view? Even from businesses point of
Mm,
view,
mm,
George, if you
mm.
see, earlier they used to say customer is the king. Now they need only the customer's money. They don't talk about the customer being the king. They talk about only about their products, about how great they are. And because nowadays there is this word called storytelling, and companies think storytelling is about themselves. The CEO wants to become a thought leader, and what leader? But you see the great resignation happening, quite quitting happening, so much toxicity in workplaces. So help us understand, in this backdrop, all the books that you have written, why is it that in spite of knowing about that we know much more about the human nature, we still know nothing about it.
Well, the more we know about human nature, the less we know about human nature. There's a couple of variables in there that are making it very hard to understand people. One of them is that all of this access to information represents a massive amount of what economists call moral hazard. It's kind of similar to the common idea that somebody tries to get something, they fail, and then they say, "Oh, God doesn't want me to get that." A very common human instinct is externalization. If you can imagine a caveman back in the day, he goes hunting, he throws his spear and he misses. If he gets angry at that animal, that's going to give him more energy to actually get that animal, get some food, and replicate more than people that don't have that instinct. And with access to so much information, it's easy to find an excuse as to why we fail. And you can find any kind of reference group online that can kind of correlate your experiences. Whereas before social media, you just had yourself and the people you interacted with on a regular basis, which kind of forced you to suck it up and deal with your issues. As far as why companies are so focused on the bottom line, much more so than they were a long time ago, is because our modern economic system is very, very, I want to say corrupt, but it's not corrupt in an evil way. It's just a very strange structure. It's essentially corrupted by our global monetary supply, which is essentially a fiat currency, which is easily
Right.
expandable. And so companies are much more focused on short-term gains than creating long-term relationships. So they want to do anything they can to jack up their stock price. It's a sort of decent strategy, kind of in the abstract, to have a CEO of a company and have the CEO's salary based on the stock price. So long as the stock price goes up because the company is growing market share and getting more and more loyal customers, that's a good strategy. But in today's market, with so much access to cheap capital, with up until recently interest rates are extremely low, they're almost forced to look at the short term as far as making money in the short term. And they don't really care if they have new customers or old customers. It's kind of like the idea of churn. If you're a money market manager and you get clients, you don't make a lot of money by retaining the same clients. You make money by every time you sell or buy a stock for the same clients, you make a percentage of the stock. So you're really trying to just churn buys and sells. And so companies, big companies, they also have a lot of protections that companies didn't have 10, 20 years ago because they're so big and there's not a lot of competition. And so they don't really have to focus on customer value that much, at least as much as they used to. This is kind of related to the idea of a free market versus a captured market. A free market means everybody's free to sell, everybody's free to buy. But a captured market is when you have such a big corporation that the customers don't really have a choice but to buy their products, either by law or because they have some kind of a monopoly. And then when companies get so big and they have so much access to cheap capital that they use to jack up their stock price, the customer is kind of almost like an afterthought.
Absolutely.
Another problem in modern times that makes it much harder to understand human nature is to understand something called the childhood mindset versus the adult mindset. We can define a childhood mindset as someone who thinks that their problems are somebody else's responsibility. And you can define an adult mindset of saying my problems, my life is my responsibility. And with so much social media and so much anger in society of everyone hating each other, the common response to any kind of problem is not to try to figure out the structure of the problem so you can figure out a structure of the solution. It's to just quickly blame somebody and say, it's not my fault. Government, fix it for me. And so we all kind of have this evolved, learned helplessness where we're kind of stuck in these unhappy lives. But at the same time, everybody's waiting for everybody else to fix the problems. And nobody feels responsible to figure out what the structure of the problem really is. And that makes it really hard for anything like self-development or even sales or anything.
Right. Everybody has you can say, an excuse or a reason they have created so that, they can remove the guilt out of their own system.
Exactly.
CEO will say that, I have that target to meet. I have to raise the prices because the stock, my own salary depends on the success of the company, and so he or she will continue to do whatever it is. Even in other businesses also, people will sell wrong products, not so good products, because they will say, okay, I have to grow my company because the investors are breathing down my neck. So everyone has a reason to do. It is almost like an assassin who has taken that contract, and because he also has to earn his livelihood. As I said, everybody can give a reason for themselves. I don't know where the real reason is actually gone nowadays. In terms of customer, then how do I assess this part of human nature on the company side, and and create my own defenses? How do I know whether this salesperson is right, this salesperson is wrong, this company's messaging is good, this company's messaging is bad? How do I create? Because then when we look at the customer, there are millions of them. How do they create or create their stance in this world which is getting so difficult to live?
Well, individually for customers, the burden lies on the customers to ask the right questions, to understand the right questions, and not believe what the salespeople tell them. But as a whole, customers can shape the decisions of companies, but it takes a long time. That's the problem. The bigger the group is, the longer it takes. For example, in America, we had that recent problem with the Bud Light advertising person, and that caused a negative response from the customers, and that's slowly shifting back to Bud Light, and how they respond, they maybe will change, maybe not. But as far as individuals, you have to really, really look out for your own interest. You have to understand what it is you want. And the problem with that is most of us don't put a lot of thought into what we consume as consumers, what we buy, what we purchase. We just kind of go off our feelings. And if you're going off your own feelings, it's very easy to be manipulated. So the best advice I would get is to be very, very almost brutal with your questions about how you think about what you want and how you're going to satisfy those needs. And a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people are really easy to manipulate these days. It's kind of two sides of a huge monster. You have the companies on top that are manipulating people. Then you have the people on the bottom that are very, very easy to manipulate. So you really have to really, really start to be responsible and think for yourself. If you expect other people to be good, then you're going to set yourself up to being taken advantage of. And that's not a good place to be.
Right,
so be
George.
very, very vicious, very brutal with your own needs, your own questions, and don't be shy about asking hard questions to salespeople and branding images and stories. And like you said, a lot of companies have stories, but they're really not that directed towards the customer. They're stories that are kind of entertaining and create good feelings, but that doesn't necessarily translate into a good product.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in this backdrop of money making by so many people, keeping money as the center of everything, you talk about that making money is the best thing you can do to save the world. Which
Yes.
type of money? Yeah, there is. I find this a bit different, being on two different sides. So help us understand which money you are talking about, because the money that we just now talked is not so good money.
Right. Money today and the monetary environment in which we use money very much lends itself to the money is evil metaphor. But the money I'm referring to, let me explain it in a metaphor. Let's say you have a little kid who wants to make money. And so he asks his dad, "Dad, how do I make money?" And the dad says, "Well, save your money and buy something and sell it to somebody." So the kid works his whole summer vacation. He doesn't play at the casino, or not the casino, but the arcade with his other friends. And so he mows lawns, he walks dogs, he cleans gutters, and he saves his money. Then he decides to go to the store with his money that he saved by working hard and buy some raw materials. And so he decides he wants to sell sandwiches to people. So he buys a couple loaves of bread, he buys some sandwich filling, he gets a little table, and he sets up a stand on the side of the street. And suppose he spends $100 on the raw materials, and at the end of the day, he gets $150 back. And so he's made $50. Well, he made $50 because people look at those sandwiches, and let's say the sandwiches cost $2 each. People look inside their mind and they look at the sandwich and they think $2 sandwich, $2 sandwich. They only buy the sandwich. They only make the exchange if they want the sandwich more than they want their $2. So this is a voluntary exchange that benefits both parties. This is just like little kids on the playground trading a bag of chips for a bag of cookies. Both traders want the other person's stuff more than their own stuff. So when they trade, they're both better off. So the more this metaphorical little kid focuses his skills on satisfying other people's needs, not his own, other people's needs, the more money he'll make. So under this context, the more money he has, that is evidence of how many people he has helped, how many people have voluntarily paid for his product or service. And so both people are better off. And so if you could imagine an economy where everybody made money like this, there wasn't fake money coming from the Federal Reserve. It was all money that came only from voluntarily paying customers. The more money you made, that would mean you made other people happy. You took all your skills and you pointed your skills at satisfying other people's subjective desires. And every time you satisfy somebody else's subjective desires, they pay you money in exchange. That's a very selfless thing to do. So under this context, the more money you make, that's proof that you are helping other people. That's proof that you're doing things that other people value. Otherwise, they wouldn't pay you for your stuff. But in today's market, like you mentioned earlier, everything is corrupt and we only buy things because we have to or else we'll get in trouble or there's no choice. And we buy things, we'd rather buy something better than we don't have a choice. So it's really, really an abstract idea. But if you desire money and you're in your own mind, no matter if you live in a corrupt economy like we have or not, so long as you focus your skills on getting money from voluntarily paying customers, you are doing good in the world. And the more money you have, the more evidence you have that you've done good in the world. So loving money under that context is a very, very virtuous thing to do, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like the old times, people
Yeah.
used to work hard, save money. Nowadays, they say, don't save money, earn
Yeah.
money and spend it. So that, and you see, the bad money would be that you are gotten, very keen onto the next iPhone and you are
Yeah.
working only for
Right.
that. And then you forget all the hard work, throw all your hard-earned money to a company, make it 3 trillion, 5 trillion, and then you end up not learning anything about money, anything about business, and you
Right.
end up working in another company where you
Right.
are sweeping floors, and so many companies are there. Perhaps that is the very wrong sort of a system. Maybe there people need to read more books. So in your
Yeah.
hundreds of your books, George, what have you written? How would you want to say, tell people who have not heard about your books, what are your books about? How can they make use of all the information, all the good things about money, so that they can actually get into the right path into their lives and live a good life, where there is actual understanding of human nature, a lot of empathy, a lot of love around us.
Yes. Yes, empathy and love, that would be in abundance in a society that only made money by voluntary exchange. Everybody would know everybody, everybody would appreciate each other, everybody would love and help each other out. But today we have the opposite. And I would say to the individual thinking about getting my books is just kind of look through all my books, and all my books are basically the same. It's a kind of very easy to understand explanation of the structure of economics, the structure of human nature, the structure of why we do things, the structure of our instincts and how they can get in the way of us achieving our goals. And it's a very, very easy to understand, very down to earth, but it does require a lot of self-responsibility. That's the one thing that will hold you back from any kind of self-development, whether it's understanding money or becoming a better communicator or even better health. You have to take full responsibility for your life. Even if the problems in your life are someone else's fault, you have to take responsibility for the solution. But if you're willing to fully live in the adult mindset where you're responsible for everything, you can understand the concepts of my books and be a better communicator, be more persuasive, be more attractive as a man, be more attractive as a woman. And the books all are all kind of specific examples of how to leverage the understanding of economics, the understanding of human nature to turn yourself into a better human.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is much to learn from you, from your books. A lot of people would like to, connect with you and learn directly from you or your website. So, what's the best way for them to connect with you, George?
The best way to connect with me is to visit my start page, which basically is a highlight of all of our products, our books. And that's at mindpersuasion.com/start.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With these great words of wisdom, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.